Hello, this is Rabbi Malik. I am standing, it looks like, in the lobby of the Dan Panorama Hotel in Jerusalem. This is where I was last year at this time with many members of Temple Beth. Today, I am actually not in Israel. I am in the United States, and I am here to share with you my words of Torah about Parshiyot Tazria-Metzora, this double parsha that was supposed to be read in shul this Shabbos. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge several colleagues whose writings provided inspiration for my Dvar Torah this week, including Rabbi Azriel Fellner, Rabbi Michael Gold, Rabbi Bonnie Capel, and Dr. Ulrich Offenberg from the Reformed Jewish community of Hamelin, Germany. So I was originally planning to take off this weekend because of a family commitment to attend a bar mitzvah service at another shul in another state. And this date was in my calendar for a while, but I recently found out that the bar mitzvah date had been rescheduled, not because of Corona, but because the family did not like this week's Torah portions and thought it would have been difficult for the bar mitzvah boy to find something meaningful to say in his Dvar Torah. And I certainly could relate because, after all, Parshat Tazria was my daughter Rivka's bat mitzvah parsha in 2014, so I am well aware of the difficulties it poses. And in 2017, at a TBA Men's Club Shabbat, when Rick Robinson spoke about the double portions of Tazria-Metzora, he prefaced his Dvar Torah with the following comments, and I quote, "While reading through the Parsha, I realized that it might be quite difficult to connect this Parsha to the men's club. Yes, this Parsha is going to be a challenge for sure. So I glanced at the internet to try to get an inspiration. I found a quote from a bar mitzvah boy who had this Parsha. He said, 'My sister got the Parsha with the 10 Commandments, and all I got was leprosy.' I know how he felt," said Rick. "So what could I take from a parsha filled with all kinds of ailments and rules?" So that's the end quote of Rick Robinson. Now, my words. The Parshiyot of Tazria-Metzora deal with topics that seem very, very far from contemporary experience. And usually, in most years, it has been nearly impossible to make sense of these two Parshiyot and its topics in our modern world. These parshas deal with ritual purity and impurity, the halacha categories that are known in Hebrew as tum'ah and tahara. And in the Torah, we read about all kinds of impurities, including women's impurity during her menstrual cycle and after giving birth, men's impurity in the event of certain bodily emissions. The Torah portion deals with body discharges, skin afflictions, swellings, rashes. One of the sources of impurity that is addressed in both Parshiyot is tzaraat. Tzaraat is a skin affliction that some say is similar to leprosy or perhaps Hansen's disease. In any event, if you were tameh, impure, from tzaraat or for another reason, it affected your religious and social status within the community. Affected people were barred from participation in ritual activities as well as certain communal activities. But that's not all. There is one particularly disturbing passage, and in it, the Torah relates that a person stricken with tzaraat was obligated to engage in some truly embarrassing behavior. He had to run through the streets, shouting and warning others about his disease. And we read in Vayikra, chapter 13, Psukim 45 to 46, "As for the person with a leprous affection, his clothes shall be rent, his head shall be left bare, and he shall cover his upper lip, and he shall call out the words, Tameh, Tameh, impure, impure." In previous years, reading Tazria-Metzora challenged modern sensibilities. But this year, everything has changed. This year, the state of society in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak has brought the words of these Torah portions to life. An unknown illness erupts, waiting for a diagnosis, and then quarantine. Have the symptoms dissipated? Keep checking, continue to stay isolated from the community. Have an exam by a healthcare professional to determine if it's safe to be with people. If so, then engage in some purification rituals and cleansing before reuniting with family and friends. These are some of the topics addressed in Parshat Tazria and Tazria-Metzora. They just as easily could be talking about COVID-19. Now, in our times, we are dealing with lung disease, not with skin afflictions, not with bodily fluid emissions, but the social measures are almost the same. Hesker, quarantine, bidud, isolation. The modern Hebrew words that one hears on a daily basis in Israel these days are derived from this week's Parsha. In Vayikra chapter 13, in Pasuk 5, we read, V'hiskiro ha-kohen, and the Kohen will quarantine him. And in Pasuk 46 of the same chapter, Perek Yud Gimel, Badad hu yoshev, michutz lamachaneh moshavo. He shall be isolated, dwelling apart from others inside the camp. He should be outside the camp. So as we read Tazria-Metzora in 2020, in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic and our current state of confinement, we can truly identify with the concepts of quarantine and isolation, of hesker and bidud. Around the world, entire towns, cities, states, and in some cases, entire countries have gone into isolation. Social distancing is compulsory. Hospitals and nursing homes are closed to the public. Infected individuals, and even those who've come into contact with others who are infected, are put into quarantine. In some places, people who don't comply with government regulations may expect to pay fines or maybe even have to go to jail. Those who are stricken with COVID-19 are not allowed any visitors. We hear about lonely deaths in hospital wards with only nurses or other hospital caretakers saying comforting words to the dying, if at all. Mourners experience lonely funeral services at nearly empty cemeteries with just a few people permitted at the graveside, relying on Zoom or Facebook Live or other technologies to include most of the mourning family and friends. And for many, this is devastating. The values that have shaped our Jewish rituals and our social behavior have been shaken to the core. We struggle with ways to express closeness and comfort via digital media. And all of this, what's happening right now, changes our ability to find meaning in this week's Torah portions. This year, perhaps for the first time, we may be able to identify with the perspectives in Tazria and Metzora, including that of the Kohen, who was charged in biblical times with examining people who were symptomatic and essentially testing them to see if they had the disease known as tzaraat. He would have to evaluate the identity and severity of the illness, and if the Kohen determined that it was indeed a case of tzaraat, there were 7 days of quarantine, then another examination. And this cycle would repeat itself until the Kohen determined that it was safe for the individual to re-enter society. And I think it's important to note that the Kohen was required to personally check each and every individual. No diagnosis of tzaraat was made on the basis of rumor or superstition or suspicion. In fact, the phrase "Vera'ah HaKohen," the priest shall look, appears no less than 30 times in these parshas. The Kohen provided an extremely personal level of one-on-one care. And I think this comes to teach us that individuals who had to be temporarily separated from the community were given a great deal of support, both during the illness and in preparation for their reintegration into society afterwards. Rick Robinson made the following point in his Dvar Torah a few years ago. He wrote and said, "We need to support each other through the difficult times and help our people to rejoin our community when the time is right." In Vayikra, in chapter 13, verse 3, the Torah reads, "Vera'ahu HaKohen." And some translate this phrase as when the Kohen sees it, as in some eruption of this skin disease. But my colleague, Rabbi Bonnie Capel, suggests that this Hebrew phrase be translated as when the Kohen looks at him, not it, at him. In other words, the Kohen was specifically directed to look at the ailing individual when he was examining him. And when someone is sick, we know that they're all too often reduced to a case of X, not just as a whole person, oftentimes not seen as an individual at all. So the Kohen had to be instructed to see him, the person, rather than just see it, the disease. Now, I did mention earlier when quoting Vayikra chapter 13, verse 45, that the person who was suffering from tzara'at, the individual who was known as a Metzora or Tsarua, was required to make a public announcement of his impure status so that people would know to give him space, essentially to socially distance themselves. And according to the Talmud in Masechet Moed Katan, the infected person was required to do this, first of all, to warn others that he was contagious, but also to elicit compassion and prayers of strength and healing on his behalf. This year, we pray for healing for all those who are suffering from COVID-19. We feel their pain. And since all of us are separated from our community right now, whether or not we are sick, we all feel the pain of our own isolation. Yet, despite this loneliness, we can certainly understand the need for our society to protect itself against the further spread of the coronavirus, just as our ancestors had the need to protect themselves from tzara'at and from other forms of impurity. This year, we understand that at least for the time being, we may have to disregard some of the ritual, social, emotional, and even economic needs of some individuals for the sake of society at large. We understand that some of our individual needs have to be set aside in order to prevent further spreading of the virus, thereby saving the lives of thousands of people. We, the members of Temple Beth Am, as well as members of synagogues around the world, yearn to gather together to daven in a sanctuary. But we must remind ourselves that there are other ways for us to bring sanctity into our lives without a physical sanctuary. Yes, we may be excluded from attending services at our shul's sanctuary, which in the past was the place where many of us sought a spiritual connection. But that doesn't mean that we have been excluded from all other experiences of Kedusha, of holiness. First and foremost, we can attain Kedusha, holiness, by staying at home and by taking necessary precautions when we do go out, whether we are practicing social distancing or wearing masks and gloves, hopefully all of the above, thereby expressing our commitment to the Jewish value of pikuach nefesh, saving a life. We can also attain Kedusha, holiness, by praying to God in our homes, whether by ourselves or in the context of a virtual minyan. And may I suggest another spiritual practice which can bring Kedusha into your lives, our lives, every day. That is the Jewish practice of reciting blessings, brachot, on food. You know, when you say a bracha before or after you eat, you elevate the mundane act of eating to a higher level, to a holy endeavor. When you say borei pri ha'etz before eating an apple, or borei pri ha'adamah before eating a carrot, what we essentially are doing is heightening our awareness of the sources of our food. You know, before the coronavirus outbreak, most of us took for granted just how easy it was to go to a food store and buy all of the items on our shopping list. Just last week, when I shopped at a supermarket in Philadelphia area, it was a process that took nearly 2 hours because of a very long line outside the store. And there were only 30 people allowed in the store at a time to ensure 10-foot social distancing. In addition to all that, the store was out of more items than I could possibly have imagined. Not only was the stock of toilet paper and paper towels depleted, but the store was also out of bread, avocados, honey, rice, pasta, vanilla, yeast, just to name a few. For the first time since I started making challah as a Jewish mother, as a Jewish woman, I was not able to get all of the ingredients that I needed to bake challah for Shabbos. So last Friday night, when I said hamotzi with my family on the store-bought challah, I had a newfound appreciation for the food I was eating, an appreciation and a deep sense of gratitude to Hashem that was enhanced by reciting the blessing, Hamotzi Lecha Min Haaretz. Every time we eat, we acknowledge the ultimate source of all our food, the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, finally, another way we can bring Kedusha, holiness, into our lives is by engaging in Jewish learning, including the study of the weekly Torah portions and other sacred texts. So yes, there are many ways to bring sanctity into our lives, despite our inability to gather together in our synagogue sanctuary. This week's Torah portions, Tazria and Metzora, provide us with some lessons that are especially valuable during this time of isolation and quarantine, of bidud and hesker. The Torah recognizes how difficult it is to be separated from others, but it also understands the need to ensure public health and safety by setting procedures in place to protect everyone's well-being. Yes, admittedly, it is extremely hard for us to be isolated from each other during this pandemic. We struggle with ways to stay connected, to feel connected. We are grateful for the technology that brings us virtual opportunities for prayer, commemoration, and learning. We feel compassion, Rahmanas, for those who are ill, as we pray for their health and safety and recovery. We also pray for ourselves. When the time comes that we can be together in person once again, I pray that we never, ever take for granted the profound blessing of gathering together in person, in community. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom.